I'm writing a book that I call When Home Fronts Became Battlegrounds, and it deals with the civilian populations at home during the two world wars in three countries, Japan, Germany, and Britain. All around the world, nations learned the so-called lessons of the First World War. That is, in an expected Second World War, they would need to mobilize their civil populations as never before to support the war effort by producing in factories, by defending their neighborhoods against aerial attacks, and by avoiding defeatism. At the same time, these very same nations devised offensive strategies to attack the enemy's civil population by aerial bombardment, food blockades, and breaking their civilian morale. Now, throughout this study, the question that intrigues me, actually obsesses me, is how did it become normal to try and win wars by destroying whole cities and starving urban populations? That is, not by defeating the enemy's armies and navies, but by taking the war directly to the home front. And that was in fact the story of the Second World War. In 1945, hundreds of cities around the world lay in ruins, many of them bombed, ironically, by two of the most democratic nations on earth, the United States and Great Britain. And yet we seldom talk about this as a global story. My book traces the transnational flow of ideas and practices that led to this horrific normalization. As a historian, I tell this story in an analytical and scholarly manner, but I also seek to reach broader audiences of military officers, politicians, and the general public. Americans in particular tend to look back on the Second World War as the so-called good war. And it was a good war in terms of its outcome, but the way that the Allies fought this war was not always so good and involved the explicit targeting of civilians. Now, sadly, we still live in a world in which civilians are often the main victims of wars. If we're to minimize civilian suffering in the future, I fervently believe that we need to know the true story of the recent past. Thank you.